The cold hits you first. Not just a chill, but a deep, gnawing cold that sinks into your bones and makes every breath feel like inhaling shards of glass. The Arctic Circle is a place few ever see, and even fewer return from unchanged. I had always thought I was ready for anything. Years of training, deployments in unforgiving terrains, and the confidence that comes with wearing the uniform of a soldier. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I saw out there. We arrived in the dead of winter, when the sun barely graces the horizon before sinking into darkness again. The world was a vast, empty expanse of ice and silence, broken only by the howling wind and the crunch of our boots against frozen snow. Our orders were clear. Set up a remote outpost, monitor unusual activity, and report back. Simple, right? Just another mission. But as the days stretched into weeks, something about this place started gnawing at me. The silence wasn't normal. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. My team consisted of 6 men, all hardened soldiers who had seen combat in different corners of the world. We didn't scare easily. But as we settled into our makeshift camp, unease crept in like an unseen force, pressing against us in the dark. It started with small things. Gear going missing, footsteps in the snow leading nowhere, radios picking up strange static in the middle of the night. First we brushed it off. The cold does weird things to the mind. Isolation plays tricks. But then we saw it. It was our 3rd week at the outpost when Ramirez, one of the most level-headed guys in our unit, came back from a perimeter check. His face pale beneath his frostbitten skin. "Something's out there," he whispered, his voice barely carrying over the wind. We followed his gaze to the edge of the treeline, where the frozen tundra met the dark silhouette of the boreal forest. First I saw nothing. Just the endless white, the eerie stillness of the Arctic night. But then movement. A flicker of shadow, too tall, too fast, and gone before my brain could process it. We went on high alert, scanning the perimeter, weapons ready. But there was nothing. No tracks, no signs of life. Just that same suffocating silence. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe a snowdrift shifting in the wind. But the feeling in my gut said otherwise. Then came the knocking. It started late at night, faint and distant at first, like something tapping against the metal walls of our shelter. We'd rush outside, rifles in hand, only to find nothing but the wind whipping through the desolate landscape. But it didn't stop. Got closer, louder. Until one night I woke up to a sound right outside my bunk. A slow, deliberate knock against the thin wall, just inches from where I slept. I held my breath, heart pounding in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to stay still, to not make a sound. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I forced myself to move, gripping my rifle as I peered through the frost-covered window. And that's when I saw it. A shape, standing just at the edge of our floodlights. Not quite human. Not quite animal. Something wrong. Didn't move, didn't react, just stood there, watching. And in that moment I knew. We were not alone out here. And whatever was watching us, it wasn't friendly. I turned to wake the others, but before I could even open my mouth, the lights flickered and the outpost plunged into darkness. The radio crackled to life with a burst of static, followed by a voice I didn't recognize, whispering words in a language I had never heard before. And then, the knocking started again. But this time it was coming from inside. For a moment none of us moved. The only sound was the wind outside, whistling through the cracks in our shelter, and that steady, deliberate knocking. But it wasn't coming from the door. It wasn't even coming from the walls. It was coming from inside the room. I swallowed hard, forcing my breathing to stay quiet. My fingers tightened around my rifle as I scanned the dim space. Ramirez, Hayes, and Cole were still asleep in their bunks. Thompson sat up slowly across from me, eyes wide with confusion. He heard it too. The knock came again, closer this time. I reached for my flashlight, switching it on with a shaky hand. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the room. Everything looked the same. Our gear piled in the corner, our rifles leaning against the wall, frost gathering along the metal edges of the shelter. But nothing was out of place. Nothing should have been making that sound. Then, from the far end of the room, Hayes sucked in a sharp breath and bolted upright, eyes darting wildly around. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, the radio on the table crackled again, a burst of static followed by a low, garbled voice. The words were distorted, spoken in a language I didn't recognize, but there was something wrong about it. The way it slurred, the way it almost seemed to echo inside my head. Thompson swung his legs over the bunk and reached for the radio. "Base, this is Outpost Delta, do you copy?" Silence. Then another burst of static. And something else, a faint sound behind it. Like breathing. Cole groaned, rubbing his face as he sat up. "What the hell's going on?" Ramirez was already on his feet. His rifle in his hands. He had that look, alert, ready for anything. "Someone's messing with us," he muttered. "Who?" Hayes whispered. "There's no one out here but us." That was the thing. We were miles away from the nearest station. Completely cut off. No civilians, no other military presence. Just us and the endless, frozen wasteland. The knocking had stopped, but the air in the room felt thick, charged with something I couldn't explain. I stood up, motioning for the others to be quiet. Slowly, I moved toward the door, pressing my ear against the cold metal. Nothing. Just the wind howling outside. I exhaled, forcing myself to relax. Maybe it was a structural shift. The cold could do weird things to metal, make it contract, creak. I almost convinced myself of that when Ramirez suddenly stiffened beside me. "Look," he whispered, pointing to the frost-covered window. I turned, shining my flashlight toward it. My stomach dropped. There were prints on the glass. Not fingerprints. Not smudges. Full handprints, large, elongated, like someone had pressed their palms against the window and dragged them downward. The frost around them was still melting. My pulse hammered in my ears. I glanced back at the others. No one had moved. No one had gone outside. And yet the prints were fresh. Thompson backed away from the window. "That wasn't there before." "No," I muttered. "It wasn't." Cole grabbed his jacket and rifle. "I say we check the perimeter. If someone's messing with us, we need to know who." Ramirez nodded. "Agreed." I hesitated. Every instinct told me that going out there in the middle of the night was a bad idea. But we couldn't just sit here, waiting for whatever was out there to come back. We geared up quickly, pulling on our heavy coats and night vision goggles. The temperature had dropped even further, and the moment we stepped outside, the cold slammed into us like a wall. The snow crunched beneath our boots as we moved in formation, scanning the area with our rifles raised. The wind howled through the dark expanse of ice and rock, but other than that, everything was still. Too still. No footprints, no signs of movement. Just the same frozen emptiness stretching out in every direction. Thompson swore under his breath. "I don't like this." None of us did. The longer we stood there, the more I felt it, that nagging sense that we were being watched. Ramirez was the first to break the silence. "We should head back." Just as we turned, a sound stopped us in our tracks. A deep, guttural noise like something scraping against ice. It came from the treeline, just beyond the reach of our floodlights. We all turned at once, weapons raised. First I saw nothing. Just the dark shapes of the trees, their branches shifting in the wind. But then movement. Something stepped out from the shadows. It was tall. Too tall. Its body was wrapped in tattered, frost-covered fabric, blending into the snow like it belonged to the land itself. Its limbs were too long, its movements slow and deliberate, like it was studying us. The air seemed to tighten, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. But I couldn't move. None of us could. We just stood there, frozen, staring at the thing that should not be there. Then, in a blink, it was gone. 1 second it was there, standing at the edge of the trees. The next, it had vanished, leaving nothing behind but the empty silence. Ramirez exhaled sharply. "Did you see that?" None of us answered. We didn't have to. We all saw it. Thompson shook his head. No way, that was human. I didn't say anything, but deep down I knew he was right. We hurried back inside, bolting the door behind us. No one spoke. No one even sat down. We just stood there, listening to the wind, to the creaking metal, to the faint sound of static still buzzing from the radio. And then, from somewhere outside, far off in the distance, came the sound of knocking. Low, deliberate, and getting closer. No one spoke for a long time. The only sound was the wind rattling against the metal walls and the faint hum of the radio. My fingers were still gripping my rifle so tightly that my knuckles ached, but I couldn't bring myself to relax. That thing, whatever it was still out there. And it knew we were here. Ramirez was the first to move, pacing the length of the room like a caged animal. "We need to call this in," he muttered, his voice low but urgent. "Something's wrong with this place." Hayes sat down on the edge of his bunk, rubbing his temples. "And what exactly do we say?" "Hey, command, there's he paused, shaking his head. "Something watching us in the woods." "You really think they'll take that seriously?" He wasn't wrong. The military didn't deal in ghost stories. And yet, this wasn't just paranoia or tricks of the mind. We all saw it. Thompson adjusted his radio and tried again. "Base, this is Outpost Delta. We have possible unknown activity in our vicinity. Do you copy?" "Static." He tried again. Still nothing. I walked over to the equipment, adjusting the dials myself, but the radio wasn't dead, it was jammed. The frequency was still active, but something was blocking it. That didn't make sense. There were no known sources of interference this far north. Ramirez stopped pacing. "We're cut off." Cole checked his watch. "Sun won't be up for another couple of hours. If it comes up at all." That was another thing. The Arctic this time of year was unpredictable. Sometimes the sky never fully darkened, sometimes it stayed black for days. Right now, it felt like the darkness would never lift. The knocking had stopped, but that didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it made things worse. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to break in. It was waiting, watching. I turned to the others. "No one goes outside alone. We stay together, weapons ready. Whatever this is, we don't let it catch us off guard." They nodded, but there was no false bravado, no jokes to lighten the mood. Just quiet understanding. Hours passed, but none of us could sleep. Every creak of the structure made us flinch. Even the wind sounded wrong, almost like it carried whispers just beyond our ability to understand. Then, some time past what should have been dawn, Ramirez nudged me. "Look at this." He was at the window, peering through a small gap in the frost. I stepped closer and felt my stomach twist. More tracks. But this time they weren't just handprints on the glass. They were in the snow, leading away from the outpost. First they looked like human footprints. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized they weren't quite right. The spacing was off, too far apart, as if whatever made them had a longer stride than any person should. And the shape, they weren't boots. They weren't even bare feet. They were wrong. Cole exhaled sharply. "That's not one of us." "No," I muttered. "It's not." We geared up again. We had to check the perimeter whether we wanted to or not. The air outside was deathly cold, and the wind had died down to almost nothing. The silence was worse. I kept my rifle raised as we followed the tracks, scanning the landscape in every direction. The snow was deep, but whatever left these prints hadn't stumbled or sunk in the way we did. It moved effortlessly. The tracks led toward the treeline, the same place we'd seen it before. But this time something was different. Near the edge of the forest, the tracks suddenly stopped. No signs of turning, no retreating steps. Just nothing. Ramirez ran a hand through his frost-covered hair. "Where the hell did it go?" No one answered. There was no answer. Then, from somewhere deeper in the trees, something cracked. A heavy sound like ice splitting apart. I turned my rifle toward the noise. "Eyes up!" Thompson took a cautious step forward, sweeping his light across the trunks. "There's something." Before he could finish, the trees shifted. Not the branches. The trees themselves. The shadows twisted, shapes moving where nothing should be moving. And then, between the trunks, something looked back at us. Shape. Figure. But wrong. My breath caught in my throat. It was tall, the same impossible height as before, its body wrapped in the same frost-covered material. But its face, if you could even call it that, was obscured like the shadows themselves were hiding it. The only thing I could see were its eyes. Dark. Hollow. And staring right at me. Then, in an instant it was gone. We didn't stick around. We moved fast, retreating back to the outpost and locking the door behind us. No one spoke. We didn't have to. We had our answer. We weren't alone. And whatever was out there wasn't leaving. Inside the outpost, the air felt heavy, like the walls were closing in on us. No one spoke. We barely even looked at each other. There was nothing to say that we didn't already know. We were in danger. And whatever was out there, whatever had been watching us, it wasn't going away. Ramirez kept his rifle across his lap, staring at the door like he was expecting it to burst open at any second. Thompson was hunched over the radio, still trying to get a signal out, though we all knew it was useless. Hayes had stopped pretending he wasn't scared. He sat in the corner, arms wrapped around himself, his breath coming out in shaky puffs of air. Checked my watch. The time didn't even feel real anymore. There was no day, no night. Just endless, suffocating darkness. Then the sound came back. Not the knocking this time. Something else. Something worse. It started low, a distant humming that sent a vibration through the floor. Faint at first, almost like a trick of the ears. But it grew, shifting in pitch, turning into something that sounded almost human. Voice. It wasn't coming from the radio. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from everywhere. I gritted my teeth, trying to focus, but the sound crawled into my head, scratching at my thoughts. It wasn't speaking a language I knew, but somehow I understood the meaning. It was calling. Hayes clamped his hands over his ears. Make it stop. Thompson smacked the radio with frustration. I can't hear anything but static. But I heard it. So did Ramirez. I could tell by the way his grip tightened on his rifle. By the way his breathing had turned shallow, eyes darting around like he was trying to track something that wasn't even in the room. Then something outside moved. A shadow passed the window. Quick. Too quick. I barely had time to react before a loud, shuddering thud hit the door. We all jumped to our feet, weapons raised. Another thud. Then another. Whatever was out there wasn't knocking anymore. It was testing the door. Ramirez gestured for everyone to stay back, inching toward the window with slow, steady movements. He peered out into the darkness, and I saw his jaw tighten. Then, without warning, he threw himself away from the glass, just as something struck it hard enough to crack the surface. We barely had time to register what was happening before the lights flickered and died. The outpost plunged into darkness. The radio let out an ear-piercing screech, then cut off completely. And then silence. No wind. No knocking. No movement. Just silence. My heart pounded in my chest. I could hear the others breathing, sharp and unsteady. Then, from the far side of the room, Hayes whispered, "Do you see that?" I turned my head slowly, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. First I saw nothing. Then, in the corner of the room, where there shouldn't have been anything but empty space, a shape began to take form. The same impossible figure we had seen outside. Only this time it was inside. The darkness around it seemed to move with it, like the shadows were alive, twisting and stretching as it stepped forward. My grip on my rifle tightened, but I couldn't lift it. I couldn't move. Then its eyes opened. Deep, black voids that seemed to swallow the dim light around them. Staring. Watching. A coldness spread through me, deeper than anything I had felt outside. It wasn't just the Arctic cold, it was something worse. Something unnatural. Hayes let out a choked breath, his back pressed against the wall, eyes wide with terror. The thing moved closer. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The lights flickered back on. The radio crackled to life with a burst of static. But we weren't safe. Because the door, the one we had locked, bolted and secured, was wide open. And outside, the snow was covered in fresh footprints, leading away from the outpost, into the darkness. The open door gaped like a wound against the night, the cold rushing in to steal whatever warmth was left in the outpost. No one moved. No one even breathed. The only sound was the static from the radio, flickering in and out like a heartbeat on the edge of failing. Ramirez was the first to step forward, his rifle shaking slightly in his grip. He reached the doorframe and hesitated, eyes locked on the footprints in the snow. They weren't ours. They were deep, precise, leading away from the outpost. But the strangest part was that they didn't start at the threshold. There were no approaching tracks, no signs that something had walked up to the door before it was opened. The prints simply began several feet away, as if something had just appeared there. Cole exhaled sharply, his breath a pale cloud in the freezing air. I don't like this, man. I didn't either. But we couldn't just stand there. We have to close the door, I said. We can't let it stay open. Ramirez nodded, stepping forward. But just as he reached for the handle, something shifted outside. A flicker of movement at the edge of the floodlights. We all saw it. A figure just at the boundary of the trees. Twitching. It wasn't moving, but it wasn't standing naturally either. Its body was slightly off, its limbs just a little too long, its posture rigid like something unused to being in its own skin. Then, without a sound, it turned and walked into the trees. Ramirez slammed the door shut. Cole locked it. Thompson grabbed the radio again, his voice tight. Base, this is Outpost Delta. Do you read? We have unknown activity at our location. Repeat, unknown hostile presence. Silence. Then the radio crackled. First it was just static, then a voice. But not one of ours. It was soft, distant, broken by interference, but I knew that voice. 'Twas my own. Don't let it in. Don't let it in. I took a step back, my blood running cold. My voice was repeating itself over and over, distorted but unmistakable. Then the words changed. It's already inside. The radio cut to static. Thompson dropped it like it had burned him. Hayes let out a shaky breath. That wasn't real. That couldn't be real. No one answered. Because deep down we all knew it was. And then the lights flickered again. Ramirez cursed, flipping his rifle's safety off. We're not staying here. If command isn't answering, we have to move. Now. I didn't argue. The outpost wasn't safe. The locked door meant nothing. Whatever was out there, whatever had been inside with us, it wasn't playing by our rules. But as we gathered our gear, something else happened. Something worse. The generator died. And with it, the floodlights outside. The darkness outside our outpost swallowed everything whole, pressing in against the walls like something alive. And then, in the suffocating silence, the knocking returned. Low. Deliberate. But this time it wasn't at the door. It was coming from inside. The knocking came from the back of the outpost, deep in the shadows where the dim emergency lights barely reached. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. No one spoke. No one breathed. The air was thick with something heavy and wrong. Ramirez lifted his rifle, his voice barely above a whisper. It's inside. The words sent a shiver through me. I gripped my weapon tighter, scanning the room. The door was still locked. The windows were intact. Nothing had entered. But the knocking was real. Thompson moved first, sweeping his flashlight toward the sound. The beam flickered over the cold steel walls, across the empty storage shelves, over the spare cots. And then it stopped. Something stood at the far end of the room. Figure. First it looked like one of us. It had the same uniform, the same boots. But the longer I looked, the more I realized something was horribly wrong. The way it stood was unnatural, too still. The shadows clung to its form, shifting like smoke, distorting its shape. Then it turned its head. Its face was mine. Perfect copy. But the eyes, they were empty. Hollow black voids that swallowed the light. It smiled. A slow, unnatural curl of the lips. Then in my own voice it whispered, "You shouldn't be here." My breath caught in my throat. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Cole fired first. Single sharp shot. The bullet tore through the figure's chest. But it didn't fall. It didn't even flinch. Instead, the wound in its chest sealed itself instantly, the darkness knitting back together like it had never been touched. Then, without warning, it moved. It wasn't running. It wasn't walking. Just shifted. One moment it was across the room. The next it was inches away. I stumbled back, barely dodging as a freezing hand shot out toward me. The air around it was suffocatingly cold, worse than the Arctic winds outside. Ramirez grabbed my arm, pulling me away. "Go. Now." We didn't need to be told twice. We ran. Through the narrow halls of the outpost, past the darkened bunks and supply rooms, toward the exit. The knocking had turned into a pounding, slamming against the walls from all sides. As we reached the door, Thompson fumbled with the lock. His hands were shaking too much to grip it. Behind us, the air crackled with something unnatural. A deep, humming sound, low and droning, like the pressure in the room had changed. I turned just in time to see the figure standing at the end of the hall, staring at me with those hollow eyes. Then, in a voice that was almost mine, it whispered, "You can't leave." The door finally gave way. The cold outside was a shock, burning against my skin as we stumbled into the snow. But I didn't care. We were out. We sprinted toward the emergency snowcat, our boots crunching over the frozen ground. The vehicle was already running, left idling just in case. Ramirez threw the door open and climbed into the driver's seat, Cole and Hayes piling in behind him. I turned to make sure Thompson was right behind me, but he wasn't. He was still at the outpost door, standing frozen in place. I shouted his name. Then slowly he turned. And I realized, it wasn't him. Not anymore. The thing wearing Thompson's face tilted its head, that same unnatural smile spreading across his lips. Then, without another sound, he stepped back into the darkness. The door slammed shut. I didn't move. Couldn't. Ramirez grabbed my arm, pulling me into the snowcat. "We have to go." The engine roared as we sped away from the outpost, the treads kicking up ice and snow behind us. My heart was still hammering, my mind racing. We didn't stop driving until the outpost was nothing but a speck in the distance. No one spoke. No one dared to. It wasn't until we reached the main base, stumbling into the warm lights of the compound, that we finally felt safe. But even as we reported everything, every impossible, terrifying detail, no one believed us. When they sent a team back to the outpost, they found nothing. No signs of struggle. No damage to the building. No footprints in the snow. And no trace of Thompson. As if he had never been there at all. But I know what I saw. I know what we all saw. And I know that somewhere deep in the Arctic night, something else is still watching. The silence in the main base felt heavier than the freezing night we had just escaped. Even inside, with walls around us and soldiers moving in and out of the hallways, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching. The warmth of the room did nothing to stop the cold that had settled deep inside my bones. We were separated as soon as we got back. Standard protocol. After any high-stress situation, everyone was questioned individually. They wanted to hear our stories separately, compare them, look for inconsistencies. I understood why. But it didn't change the truth. I sat in a small office, my hands still shaking as I gripped a cup of untouched coffee. Across from me, a high-ranking officer studied me with narrowed eyes, his expression unreadable. I told him everything. The knocking, the voice on the radio, the figure that wore my face. I told him how we ran, how Thompson, no, the thing that looked like Thompson had stayed behind. The officer listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned forward slightly. "And you're certain you saw something take Thompson?" I exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the table. "I know what I saw." His expression didn't change. He glanced down at his notes, flipping through them slowly. Then, after a long pause, he spoke again. We found nothing at the outpost. No footprints. No sign of forced entry. No damage. I know. My voice was hollow. It doesn't matter what you found. That's what it does. It erases things. His eyes flicked up to me. There was something there, something just beneath the surface. He knew something. But he didn't say it. Instead, he closed the file and stood. Get some rest, soldier. That was it. That was all he said. I was sent back to my bunk, but sleep never came. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the same words repeating in my head. It's already inside. By morning things felt wrong. Not in an obvious way. The base still ran like normal. The radio calls, the shift changes, the dull routine of life in the Arctic. But something was off. Ramirez wouldn't look me in the eye. Cole barely spoke. Hayes had locked himself in his room, refusing to come out. And worst of all, no one else remembered Thompson. Not the other soldiers, not the officers, no one. It was like he had never existed. Like the Arctic had swallowed him whole, erased every trace of him. Except for us. We remembered. And that made it worse. I tried to bring it up once, casually, just to test the reaction. Have you heard anything about Thompson? I asked another soldier over breakfast. The guy frowned at me. Who? I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I didn't try again after that. Days passed, then weeks. The outpost was reassigned. New soldiers were sent out there. No reports came back of anything strange. No one spoke of shadows in the snow or voices on the radio. And yet, every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing standing in the dark, wearing my face, smiling. Then one night something happened. I woke up to a soft knock at my door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. I reached for my sidearm, my fingers curling around the grip. The room was dark, too quiet. Another knock. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move. Slowly, I stood and reached for the door, every instinct screaming at me not to open it. But I had to know. Pulled it open. The hallway was empty. Cold air seeped in from somewhere, carrying with it the faintest echo of something distant. Something almost like static. I stepped forward, glancing in both directions. The hall was deserted. But just as I turned to go back inside, my blood went cold. There, at the end of the hallway, a figure stood in the shadows. It was wearing a uniform. Familiar uniform. My breath caught in my throat. The figure took a step forward, just enough for the light to catch its face. Thompson. Or at least something that looked like him. His eyes were empty. His lips curled into that slow, unnatural smile. And then, in a voice that was both his and not his, he whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I blinked, and he was gone. The hallway was empty again, as if nothing had ever been there. I shut the door and locked it. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By morning I made my decision. I put in for reassignment. They approved it without question. Within 2 days I was on a plane, leaving the Arctic behind. But I knew I wasn't really escaping. Because some nights, even now, I still hear the knocking. Low. Deliberate. And I know deep down that it's not over. Not really.